My kids used to say, Mom, put your eyebrows.
Good to go? Remember, there's like a 20-second delay. We're good to go. Ron.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. I'd like to call this meeting to order. If you'll stand, we'll have our invocation and our pledge of allegiance. Let's pray, please. Heavenly Father, we are grateful for the beautiful day that you've given us today. We're also thankful of Easter, when you remind us on that day of the year what your Son did for us so many years ago. We ask that you would grant this council just a portion of your wisdom tonight as we discuss the issues of our city and the issues that concern our citizens. And we ask all of this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and the republic for which it stands, one nation. Our next item on our agenda is our audience for visitors. If there's anyone in our audience who would like to address council on any issue at this time, we'd be delighted to hear from you. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to approval of minutes from our regular session, March 27th.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Okay,
Second.
all right, I have a motion made and second that we adopt the regular session minutes, March 27th, 2023. Any concerns, comments, any additions to the minutes? Okay, Ms. Kim?
Councilwoman Fox. Aye. Councilman Hucks.
Aye.
Councilman Fye.
Aye.
Councilman Southall.
Aye.
Councilwoman Andrews.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Freeman.
Aye.
Mayor Hessel.
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, the motion carried by a vote of 7-0.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Item E on our agenda is a public hearing. I think our Assistant City Manager, Tanya, is going to take that. It's recommended constrained capital improvement plan fiscal years 2024 through 2028 and beyond. Ms. Tanya?
With the Planning Commission, who has approved it unanimously. I'd like to thank Mr. Cannella for helping me put this document together. And I also like to recognize we have John Anderson and Chad and Garrett here in case there's questions as it relates to what's being proposed tonight. So with anything, we have the CCIP. These are what we are constrained to kind of look at. Basically, with it, we want to build facilities. We want to improve our financial planning. Again, there's the constrained part. We want to make sure we can afford what we're asking y'all to approve, whether it's through general fund transfer, whether it's through state funding or sewer, or unfortunately putting it on our credit card. So all these things take into consideration. And then, of course, priorities. Everything is priorities for us, so we unfortunately have to make a decision of what we can afford. Kind of goes to the top of the priority list. Couple updates for you. I'm proud to say that we have, completed the renovations on the middle school, as well as, if you be reminded, we did the turf field at the middle school, as well as the press box. A couple other things that we were able to do is the scoreboard, as well as provide HVAC at the high school gym. So I know everybody appreciates that when they're watching volleyball, basketball, or the cheerleading events that they have in there, or just during their daily activities. It does make a difference having it there. Also, the traffic loop, I believe that's been a success for the high school as well. Currently, what's in progress, if you can remember, part of the funding that we received from ARPA, we were provided to the schools for an HVAC at the primary school. So that's currently under construction right now. Isn't that an exciting list? These are all the things that we have completed here at the city. I won't go through all of them, but as you know, a couple of things that y'all have approved that has really made a big difference is the radios for public safety. Our radios were very much outdated and needed to be, so one of the things that was put forth, as well as Microsoft updates. We were kind of out of date, so we definitely got those completed. So, currently in progress, very excited, public safety building. Signal boosters, that's still outstanding that the chief has asked us to do. Currently in our 4 schools, there are a couple areas that there's poor communication, so we're waiting on Motorola to give us the boosters to ensure that there's connectivity for our officers when they're in the building. as well as a couple of things, self-loss and bike path, the Oxford Muse drainage, as well as the Poquoson roadway drainage that's currently under contract right now. Couple of things that are out for process for bid is the pool renovation, of course, our basketball courts at South Lawson, and of course, we don't ever get sick of seeing the VDOT expansion. One day I'd like to see that in the completed box, but right now that's going to stay in progress. So, as you're aware, the city manager makes a recommendation, and we're only going to focus on 2024 because that's currently what's being presented to you tonight for the budget. Couple of things that we can put forth because financially we're able to afford them are replacement vehicles for the police. That 145 includes 2 vehicles to completely outfit it. The second half of the replacement Medic 11, if you recall, last year you funded about $175,000, hoping to get a 50-50 grant. We were unsuccessful with that, so this now will fund the additional $175,000 that we need. Very exciting that we need a ladder truck that we put in there. 2-step, we're going to use that with debt. If you notice the funding sources that are there, GF is from our general fund transfer. D is our credit card. You think about it as, mortgage. That is our city credit card that we're asking for. A couple other things is the Victory Boulevard. That is our smart scale that we're asking for. So that's a shared where the city is responsible for $43,000 and the state provides about $3 million towards that project, as well as a traffic signal support. That again is something to make sure when the lights go out or they're blinking, we have funding to make sure they stay up and running. A couple of things is the street paving. If you notice the SF, that is state funding, and those are things that happen every year to update our streets. A couple of the needed projects. Our city hall door replacements are in dire straits. Chad has pointed out the efficiency that we're losing, so therefore we have put those in there for the budget this year, as well as the financial product of an IBM replacement to make sure our information stays secure. Down at the bottom is your utility projects. That is completely funded by sewer revenue. That is about pump station equipment upgrades, their SCADA system to make sure all the systems are operating properly, and then of course updating the buildings, whether it's roof or exterior stuff. And of course, that's the Victory Boulevard, that's the state side, the $3.7 million. So with that, we do have an ordinance for you to approve tonight, but staff's here, I'm here if you have any questions as it relates to the 24 recommendation.
Hey, let's ask for questions. Anybody? By the way, Tanya, it's a great presentation. Thank you for that. Any questions of Tanya? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I recommend an ordinance to approve the constrained capital.
We got to do a public hearing.
Public
first.
hearing, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Tanya, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it. Okay, let's open the public hearing then and ask if there's anyone in our audience that'd like to address this recommended constrained capital improvement plan. Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, I propose an ordinance to approve the constrained capital improvements plan for fiscal year 2024 beyond 2028.
Okay,
Second.
all right, I have a motion made second. We adopt that resolution. Any concerns, comments? No questions? Okay, Ms. Kim?
Councilwoman Andrews,
Aye.
Councilman Fye,
Aye.
Councilman Southall,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Freeman,
Aye.
Councilman Hugs,
Aye.
Councilwoman Fox,
Aye.
Mayor Hessel.
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, the motion carried by a vote of 7-0.
Okay, thanks a lot, Pam. All right, let's move on to item F. It's new business, the recommended budget for fiscal year 2024. Mr. Wheeler.
Okay, thank you. Tanya? Are we already failing? There we go. Thank you very much.
Too bad.
All right. Members of council, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the opportunity to present the city manager's budget recommendations to you. I would note that each of you received a copy of the budget last Thursday, and it was posted online, and that link was also shared with our employees on Friday. So for most of you, this is really not the first time you're hearing about it. So in reference to that, this presentation is designed to be a summary for council, but also really a summary introduction for the members of the community as well that may not have had a chance to read through the 200-plus page document at this point. So I'll go through it relatively quickly. As always, we're glad to answer questions. We're particularly glad to sit down with council members if you've got detailed questions between meetings that we can answer for you, or we'll make ourselves available to you at any time that it's convenient for you. But having said that, we'll roll on. I believe this is the 14th budget I've had the privilege to present here in Poquoson. And some of this is very well known to council. You know, we start every year, before we decide where we're going, we take a real hard look at where we are and where we have been in terms of performance in the current year, our fiscal foundations. And I'm real pleased to tell you that we did a great job in becoming prepared for what came next following the 2009-10 recession. And as we got towards this and went through the COVID process, based on your policies and our shared work, we actually emerged from the COVID public health emergency a little stronger than when we started. And there's lots of reasons for that, but it really starts with a firm foundation. So we remain in a firm foundation from which to go into the future. And our future this year is a little bit more uncertain than usual years. I won't read each word up here to you, but as council is aware, we've seen extraordinary high inflation, extraordinary in our lifetime over the last year, depending on which metric you read and which, whether it's year over year or month to month, we're at a 6 to 8% inflation rate. We've not seen that, so that's going to hit the budget and everything we do. Also, there is some thought that we either are in or there is a recession on our near-term horizon. Whether that's true, when it might hit, how long it might go, and how deep it is are all question marks that we have to try to deal with as we put together the fiscal plan. In every recessionary time that I've been a part of in my career, except for this one, it was normally not one that was done at full employment. We've seen, coming out of the public health emergency, that our hiring challenges, which have always been a bit of a challenge, have become particularly more pronounced. And that has lots to do with what others are paying, also increased private and public sector competition, as well as just a reduction in the number of people that seem to want to work. Our applicant pools are, if you think of them not as a pool, but think of it as more of a river, they are narrower and shallower than we've seen. We've been fortunate to be able to still hire some really great people in those diminished pools, but it's becoming increasingly difficult, particularly in police, as our neighbors each try to outcompete each other to replace the sometimes hundreds of vacancies that they have. What they're doing in terms of starting pay bonuses and the like is difficult for us all to deal with. And then the same pressures sort of roll on to public safety in general in terms of recruitment and retention. Here, the fire and EMS joins that area of increased competition as they find the other communities in our area, as well as the private sector, are paying more for example, advanced EMS certifications. You'll see something on that later in this budget presentation. And quite honestly, as it relates to policing, although I'm not an expert, though experts I talk to, share with me that it's not just that new people are less attractive to go into policing generally, but the police departments across this country have been under more strain than even the general strain of COVID for at least 2 years, and that's wearing on folks too. So what we've seen, and my peers have seen, is a greater movement outside of local law enforcement for those folks that are police trained. They have other options. They have state options, they have federal options, they have private options, they have university options, and while that's not for everybody, that seems to be more attractive generally than it was. So public safety, police in particular as it relates to hiring, are a challenge for us. So we will deal with that as we go further. It goes without saying that our school division suffers from some of the same challenges that we have generally, and public safety in particular. So you'll see some recommendations as it relates to that. Other things to consider going into the '24 budget, as Tanya mentioned in her CIP presentation, the public safety building design process is moving ahead. We anticipate taking this to a construction bid this summer, and we need to be flexible so that we don't paint ourselves into a corner with our reserves or our debt capacity should that building come in over budget. We hope that it won't. We're working to make sure that it doesn't, but we don't control the other side of that bid process. So we needed to be mindful of that. We also have, and usually in a recessionary period, one of the first things you do is stop spending money on vehicle replacements and other things with the idea that, well, when it gets better, we'll get back to it. But we've got some things that we just need to do. The fire department's ladder truck leads that list. That's an extremely expensive item with a 20-plus year useful life. And if you order one from scratch, it could be 3 years before you get it. So we need to begin that process before we've wrung every single bit of life out of our existing one. But I tell you that it's already well overdue in past 20 years. In addition to that, as Tanya spoke in the public hearing comments, we have an ambulance that we need to replace. So the second half of the two allocations for the ambulance you see in this budget recommendation, as well as there are 4 police cars in the budget related to replacement of existing vehicles, as well as the new positions that are recommended, which I'll speak about in a minute. And if all of that wasn't complicated enough, the General Assembly has not completed its work. And we had thought that they might complete it later this week. But the General Assembly's headlines in the Richmond Times-Dispatch over the weekend hint that it may not be until June. So like many things, we're going to have to go with the best available information, knowing that it's not in the level of certainty we wished it was. Where that really comes into play, comes to play in many places, but one example is teacher compensation. The governor proposed one thing, both houses have a different thing than the governor, but neither one of them has really passed a budget, and the governor hasn't signed one. So we've tried to be flexible in how we approach that subject, and then we've tried to treat our own employees similar to that flexibility. But it's really, had the General Assembly completed its work on time, that whole box would be eliminated. But unfortunately, it's likely that you'll actually adopt this budget before the General Assembly concludes its work in June. Oh, there we go. So as council members are aware, we use certain guiding principles that you've helped us to create over the years. There's no particular 1 through 5, but just in the circle, we try our best to maintain stable property rates, both real estate and personal property. We focus first on the expenditure side of the budget and making sure that we can continue to do the things we're doing now and have done before we consider what we might do next. And oftentimes, we have to stop at the end of that first calculation. As always, our budgets are developed in strict adherence to your financial guidelines. These are the same financial guidelines that underpin that strong foundation that I was speaking about, and really the things that help guide us to our AAA bond rating. As noted, budgets seem like they're a point in time, but they're really just a point in a much larger journey. So we use the best information we have, knowing full well that we may have to make changes to it as it goes forward. And lastly, we always try to limit new initiatives. Honestly, not as good at that in this budget as I've been in the past, as there are a significant number of public safety initiatives, but all the new initiatives in the budget that are truly new are in public safety, and I support all of them. And had we had the money, I could probably make a case for several more. But so the one caveat to limit new initiatives, I didn't do as good a job as I have in limiting in terms of recommendations as it relates to public safety. We'll talk about those in a minute. So the guiding principles, I'll pick up some speed, but not after this chart, not with this chart. This is a reassessment year. We do a reassessment every other year. What the assessor has shared with us is an average increase of 12%. That's over a 2-year period. Other localities in our area are pretty close to that on a 1-year period. But in an effort to mitigate some of the impact on the taxpayer of that increase in value, we're proposing a tax rate reduction for real estate from 113 to 111. Personal property, we don't propose any change to the rate. Council may recall last year, as we saw that unprecedented and largely unanticipated spike in used car values that relate to the pandemic and the supply chain issues, Council approved a 1-year reduction to the ratio. And there is no suggestion that we do that this year. At this time last year, the conventional wisdom was it was going to sort of take 3 years to back itself down, and it is essentially almost completely backed itself down in 1 year. So we're sort of essentially back to where we were. As I mentioned, we focus on existing services first, and so you'll see a great deal of attention to base budgets and other things to make sure that we don't starve ourselves for what we're doing now in an effort to do something else. And as I mentioned before, public safety is really the only significant area of new initiatives outside of employee compensation. As always, we use your adopted guidelines as our foundation. And as I mentioned, the General Assembly is not helping us. And certainly the Fed's not helping us. And the general rate of inflation is not helping us. And the regional labor force is not helping us either. So we have more challenges than usual, but I think we've done the best we can with reasonable assumptions going forward. And as I mentioned, limiting the new initiatives to just public safety. There's some things you just can't wait on, and these recommendations reflect our opinion that there are some of those in the area of public safety. So to give you a sense of how big our budget is, this is the general fund budget only. The larger budget is a couple of $10 to $20 million more, depending on what's in the CIP. But you can see our growth from the amended budget at about 5%. It's closer to 10% if you go from the adopted budget. And that is driven in no small way by inflation, but also the compensation adjustment we'll talk about in a few minutes. I know this is hard to see, but there is essentially a Pac-Man, the big purple Pac-Man, that is all the same color, which is approximately 75% of that chart, if you eyeball it from here anyway. That's our largest source of revenue. That is general real estate and personal property taxes. The chart is inclusive of the recommendation for a 2-cent real estate tax reduction. As a largely residential area with no extremely large private sector employers, this is not unusual. What is, I guess, unusual is the percentage of reliance on real estate and personal property. we just don't have as much diversification as we wish. Sometimes that actually helps us, and sometimes it doesn't, but it's something to always be mindful of. And I know this is really hard to see, but the takeaway from this chart is if you look to the left of that pie chart, the two darker colors, black and gray from here, that's public safety and education. And one thing to note, education, we just reflect our contribution to the budget. There's a larger school budget, which includes also the state and federal. So their budget is larger than their share here, if you look at it as one big public pocketbook. But for our purposes and our contribution, you'll see that between the two of them, that's about 60% of our general fund budget. All right, so traditionally, we have divided the budget into strategic focus areas. Again, the numbers do not reflect a priority. They simply reflect a way to differentiate between the first one and the second one. But education and public safety have always been, during my time here and well before it, the two things that really drive budget and government service in Poquoson. In terms of the school budget, the school board has requested almost $700,000 in additional local money, and the recommended budget includes what the school board has asked for and actually has a small amount on top of that. There are a limited number of new positions to support primary school special ed programs. And the reason there's a little bit more, as we talked a few minutes ago about the General Assembly's work and how that differed from the governor. The governor had a certain size compensation increase, but with a bonus. The General Assembly, they didn't have a bonus, but they had a higher number. And anyway, by adding just that little bit more than the school board requested, it basically provides the local funding for any of those scenarios to happen. And so if ultimately the prevailing 7% compensation adjustment that is in Senate and House of Delegates budget at this point is ultimately what's passed, there will be sufficient local money to support that. Public safety is our big focus area in this budget. Council will remember that that recently you authorized us to make application for 6 firefighters through the SAFER grant. In addition to those, and hope to hear from that sometime in June. But in addition to that, this budget contains funding for 3 additional police officers, as well as the equipment and the vehicles necessary. It gets us 3/4 of the way to adding an additional position to each patrol shift. We don't typically recommend things like this at mid-year, but the reason that we felt comfortable doing it that way is we're relying, from a revenue projection standpoint, on the build-out of the houses that are building out at Legacy. We're not assuming that they're all going to be there July 1st. So I think we've taken a reasonable but conservative approach to the revenue impacts of that, and by modeling as half year. What that also means is the following fiscal year, we'll have both halves, so we'll have enough to pay the continuing cost of the positions. In addition to that, we have put money in the budget to create a bundle of resources that, should we not get the SAFER grant, it's also around the mid-year time frame. If council wanted to move forward and add 3 of those positions, there will be a bundle of resources available to do that. And timing is not our friend on this. We have to make decisions before we hear. So we have to be careful not to supplant those positions, because most grants do not allow you to supplant. So that's why bundle is there and not a specific recommendation at this time. Additionally, The only other positions other than police and fire specific, the only other one in the budget is a part-time temporary construction manager. Normally, I wouldn't even footnote that, but the purpose of that position is to assist us with public safety building construction. We're fortunate that the gentleman that is working with us is the same gentleman that helped the school system through their middle school renovation project. He's already paying dividends, and he's just been with us just a few weeks, part-time capacity. Lastly, on this slide, there have been, as fire departments, EMS departments have competed with one another in our region as well as our sub-region, one of the things that they've done to become more attractive to their neighbors is to substantially increase the EMS supplements for advanced EMS certifications beyond those that are minimally required. We provide supplements in both police department and fire department for those types of advanced EMS certifications, and what we are proposing in this budget is that we increase each of those by 50%. That will not take us to leading the pack, but it will take us to pretty close to where the majority of the pack is, where we have traditionally been. We'll have to continue to look at this, as we will in some of the other factors that shape these recommendations. May recall as last calendar year came to an end, we needed to make an adjustment. We brought to you, and we were fortunate that you approved it, an additional out-of-cycle increase in public safety compensation. So we know that the recommendations here, assuming you agree with them, are not necessarily the end. So we'll continue to monitor and come back to you when we need to, so that we can remain competitive, both in terms of recruiting new folks, but also retaining the ones that we have. I already spoke about the SAFER grants. I won't do that again. And Tanya spoke to this in her comments previously, but there's a financial plan embedded in this budget, as well as money to pay for it the first year, to move forward with that ladder truck and the med unit, as well as a total of 4 police cars, 2 replacement and 2 new. There really are no significant new initiatives in strategic focus area 3, quality of life. There is full permanent funding for our June event, which we began last year, and we were fortunate recently you approved some money to do it this coming June. This will, if you approve it, make it a permanent part of our budget. You won't have to see this as a mid-year request. And as Tanya mentioned before, although we don't have any significant new initiatives in this area, we have some that you've already approved that we're in the process of finishing. Specifically, as examples, the walking trail at South Lawson, recently signed off on by VDOT, the outdoor basketball court, which is out for bid right now, I think, and we're still working towards that restroom facility, but I'm hopeful we'll have all of them there this calendar year. So while we may not be able to add too many new things here, we have some things we've already added that are catching back up. In terms of quality services in the city of Poquoson, probably everywhere, but when we speak to here, it really begins and is very largely affected by the folks that we have that work in the city. So we've put our emphasis there, and really along with public safety, this is really our other emphasis area along I guess, with education. I already spoke to sort of how the regional employers have, local government employers are they're in this trying to figure out what to do, just like we are. Most have something between 5 to 7% in terms of pay adjustment. The ones that have 5 also often have something else added to it. For example, in York County, they're doing 5% plus, I believe it's $750. In other places, it might be 5%, but they're implementing a pay study, which has significant but unquantifiable or unarticulate impacts as well. So what is trying to say here is that we're not an outlier here. We might end up being slightly better than some, but there will also be some that go by us. But the thought here is to recommend the 7% pay adjustment for all of our permanent, full-time, and part-time employees, in part to remain, to maintain our competitive position, but also in reflection of the fact that we've seen significant inflation over the last 12 years. That 7% pay increase isn't going to buy what it would have bought 3 years ago. And as I said before, the school system, the state hasn't sorted out what they're doing for teachers, but the two leading ideas are 7%. So this is consistent with that as well, and consistent with the recommendation for school local funding. We sort of close with how we started, which is if council were to approve this budget, we remain in conformance with our guidelines. We're not doing things that will damage our fiscal position or our credit rating, and even through everything that came with the recession and the public health emergency and all of the things we've been dealing with for the last couple of years. Our reserves are strong. Your fiscal stability reserve is strong. Our AAA bond rating is unchanged. We've always been mindful of that in the recommendations that we've prepared for you. These are mostly things you've heard before, but for the benefit of the public, we'll try to quantify some of these things. The 7% compensation adjustment, you'll see what that is listed at $683,000. The additional cost of increasing by 50% police and fire EMS supplements is a little bit less than $100,000. We got lucky budgetarily because Virginia changes its VRS, Virginia Retirement System, rates every 2 years. So this coming year is not a change year, although what we see primarily for the following year, FY 2025, may be a small rate reduction, which would be extremely welcome. And for lots of reasons, not all of which I can fully understand, our health insurance renewal came in at no change. Don't kick against it. But that may well be during the public health emergency. A lot of people went to ground, and if that also translated to a lessening of optional medical procedures as well as routine visits and things, we may see a temporary actuarial positive from that. It'll sort itself out, and hopefully nobody failed to do what they needed to do for themselves or their families. But we're seeing that, and we're not the only ones. We saw more of an increase last year, I think, than we expected. But sometimes it takes a couple of years to bounce its way through your experience tables. From this point going forward, I have 2 or 3 slides left. This evening, obviously, is a presentation on the budget. At your next regularly scheduled meeting, the 24th, by tradition, council meets with the school board in joint session to talk about the school board's budget and to share information one with the other. My experience here, as opposed to other places, is it's relatively pleasant experience here in the city of Poquoson because we have a tradition of working closely with the school system and funding what they've asked for. And they, on their side, do a very good job in sort of sifting out the difference between what they need to have and what maybe they don't need as much. So they make responsible requests, which are usually in the realm of what we can say yes to. So it's better than some places in the Commonwealth, some of which I've worked. That evening, we typically also do a short public session to bring you up to date on any changes that may have happened from a expenditure or a revenue standpoint since we put the budget the bed for the recommended budget. So, for example, it won't happen this year, but let's say this General Assembly did complete it, it'd update you on what that meant, for example. That evening, we have the budget public hearing, including the public hearing on the proposed tax rate on years where there is a reassessment, and that you're required to have two public hearings, one solely on the tax rate. So we'll have both of them that evening. The scheduled budget adoption is your first meeting in May. And as always, staff stands ready to assist you with any additional work sessions you may require between this day and that day. But that is the basic schedule going forward. For those at home that would like to access the budget, you can do it at least 4 ways. It is available online, front and center on our website. If you go down to what I might consider the middle of the front page, you'll find that icon there to the right. If you click on it, it'll take you to the budget. There are also hard copies available in the library, in the manager's office, and in the finance office. And before I conclude my remarks, I just want to thank everyone on our team that helped make this possible. Folks in finance, Tara and her team do a great deal of work, as do the department heads, the superintendent's office, the school board, and for the purposes of the presentation that I just walked through, I'd like to thank both Kim and Tara for with that. That concludes the presentation. Glad to answer any questions if you have any this evening, and we would be very welcome the opportunity to sit down with you and discuss any questions that you may have between now and the next meeting. If there's anything you'd like to dig into the details, we'll make sure we've got the right people in the room to answer your questions. That's all I have.
Randy, thank you very much. Outstanding presentation. Any questions of Randy right now?
I have a quick question. Remind me, if there's something we see in the budget that we want to suggest, how that process work?
As simple as, you can share that with us if you'd like us to help you flesh your idea out. But really, anytime the council is together, any council member can suggest a change. You don't have to do it this way, but I would suggest that if you're going to want to add something, you got to try to have a balanced idea. So if we can assist you in that in any way, let us know, and we'll be glad to do it. And but really, it really can come at any time prior to the motion on the budget, and even after.
This budget does not include anything for the presentation about the Two Tree Park.
That is correct.
Okay.
There is nothing in the budget for Two Tree Park. It would have been a little ahead of time, but unless council wants to allocate something specifically in this budget, it will probably go on the short list for mid-year, but some of the things we can begin to work on already. And I know that for example, they talked about having a gravel parking lot up front. I'm more inclined to pave that parking lot for lots of reasons, not the least of which it's on our main drag. So we're actually already working on that. Thomas assisted with some of that. Sean is assisting with some of that. Fox, your question about ADA compliance, we talked about that as it relates to the picnic shelter. Even if the path does work, it might be good to have a hard surface getting from the parking lot to a minimum to the shelter. We're working on all of those things, and as we get through the budget, most of these things don't cost a great deal of money. So we may be able to savings and other things to put it forward. But anything we haven't by 3 or 4 months from now will be part of our mid-year request to council.
Okay, any other questions?
I do. I have a couple
Sure.
questions. Just to be clear, the 7% would be a cost of living adjustment. Is that accurate?
It's just an adjustment. We didn't call it anything specific. Everyone would get it if that's what you're asking.
Okay. But then there could be something else in addition.
That was York County.
Okay.
York County was doing 5% plus $750. rather than a 7% adjustment. There is no money allocated in the budget for bonuses. That is something we have done at different times at mid-year when we had the money. Council's done it. The only things that fall into compensation in the recommended budget are the 7% pay increase for all permanent employees, and then the increase to the EMS supplements.
Okay, and my question about the EMS supplement, and I'm trusting you, you know this, I don't, that's why I'm asking, it might sound like a dumb question, but instead of a supplement, is it possible to add that to salaries rather than a supplement? Or is that not,
Is it possible? Yes.
what would be the,
What would be the downside of doing that? Actually, it's one of the things on our list we're kind of working through. There's no major downside to it, except that, a supplement is something that you don't typically get every day that you're qualify for it and continue to qualify for it. So, for example, if a supplement was $2,000 and it was in your paycheck for 7 years, subject to cost of living adjustments and other things, well, it's going to be considerably more than $2,000. So if you don't qualify in your 8th year, are we taking the $2,000 out? Are we taking the rest? It's largely a bookkeeping issue, but not solely. I know one of the things that folks were concerned about, and I think we tried to address that issue, is whether or not supplements count towards their retirement things, which they do. It's part of the, it's compensable thing. So really, I think the last remaining issue there is, should the supplement itself be subject to a yearly increase?
right, like part of that 7%?
Right.
Okay,
And if council wished to do that, you certainly could.
okay.
But in this particular case, we are suggesting a 50% increase in the supplement at this point.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Randy, thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. And for those of you who've worked on this budget, all of you in this room, I think, have, you've done a really, really good job. When we think about budgets, I think about taxes, I think about schools, I think about our employees. Top of that list would be our employees. And I think the manager and his team have covered those well. And, I, for one, and I'm sure council, appreciates you look, especially those 3 areas. And then to be able to continue on with planned projects that we've talked about time after time. I just don't know how you do it any better. So, all right, let's move on to our closed session. It's pursuant to section 2.2-3711A3 of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended to discuss acquisition of real property for public purpose. Your motion?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Second.
All right, motion made second. We go to closed session. Ms. Kim?
Andrews? Councilwoman Fox?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Freeman?
Aye.
Councilman Southall?
Aye.
Councilman Hucks? Mayor Hessel?
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, the motion carried by a vote of 7-0.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, if we all reconvene from our closed session, we need to certify that, please.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we only talked about the things that the law requires us to talk about in closed session.
Okay, that's close enough. All right, your motion makes second that we certify our closed session. Ms. Kim?
Vice Mayor Freeman.
Aye.
Councilwoman Andrews.
Aye.
Councilman Southall.
Aye.
Councilman Fye.
Aye.
Councilman Hucks.
Aye.
Councilwoman Fox.
Aye.
Mayor Hessel. Mr. Mayor, the motion carried by a vote of 7-0.
Okay, Randy, any more comments?
Yes, sir. 5 things, believe it or not. I just wanted to share with the public and share with council that we have made a selection for our next fire chief. I'm pleased to share with you that Michael Bryant has been offered and has accepted the position to serve as our next fire chief. You probably know Michael. He's got more than 40 years' worth of experience serving this city, including more than 16 as deputy chief, and he's been the emergency services coordinator since about the time I got here, about 13 years. He will be replacing Robert Holloway upon his retirement. Robert will be retiring at the end of this month, and Robert is the last working town of Poquoson employee. And his service in January of 1975, and we became a city in July of that same year. So Robert's given more than 48 years of service to our. That's extraordinary. Don't ever try to replace a 48-year employee, but you step up and be the next person to do it. Michael's got more than 40 years' experience, so he might make it himself. And council members, we're going to be doing a luncheon at Company 1 to celebrate that with him, and we will get invitations out to you shortly. We'd love it if you can attend. I know it's not always possible during the day, but we'll let you know and hope that you can come. Wanted to take a moment and thank several of the departments. Last week, we had a power outage just happened in the middle of the day. We thought it was a contractor working on Hudgens, but in fact, it was somebody working in the legacy development that was responsible for losing about a third of the power to the city. But where I really want to thank is the police department for their near instantaneous work to keep staffing our intersections as our traffic lights went out. Before we could even think about what we're going to do next, I was already receiving a text from John Anderson saying that he and his public works people were on their way with generators to run those, and that's a great response, and thank you for that. Glad nobody got hurt that day, of course, but we don't have that many police officers, and if we can get them doing the rest of their job, intersection control with speedy addition of generators, that's a win-win for everybody. And fortunately, they had projected it might be down 6 hours. It was down considerably less than that, so I guess thanks to Dominion as well. But that was a proud little, it was a little thing to be big proud of that day. I want to thank everyone that was involved with or attended the Easter egg event this past weekend, which was put on by our Parks and Rec Department, along with Emmy's Baptist Church, and a whole bunch of high school students and a lot of other volunteers. And on Saturday morning, in what seemed like 90 seconds, more than 4,000 eggs were hunted and properly basketized. And that was a pretty cool thing. I'm sorry I missed it this year. I understand the weather was a challenge, but the enthusiasm did not wane. And lastly, just a piece of community good news, one of those questions that I get periodically. I'm pleased to announce that Schooners is announced their opening date as the 2nd of May. And we're glad to have them come to join our community. There are a lot of people that want to be in that first wave, so they're already sort of booked up. And so, as always in Poquoson, when there's a new restaurant, we ask community to be a little bit patient because there's more demand than there are seats, particularly the first few days where they're working the final bugs out. So do plan to go, but if you can wait 2 or 3 days to allow someone else to go first, is probably not a bad thing. And beyond that, that's all I have.
All right, so thank you. David?
Thank you, Gordon. I have no comment.
Okay. Allison?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. I just want to tell you both that you've done a great job, and I've learned a lot, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Keith?
Yes, last Wednesday on the 5th, I was able to attend the Langley Civic Leader Association luncheon that they hold about every other month with Charity Capaza. And it was fun. Learned a lot about what they do and submitted my application, and they'll consider me for membership as long as I write a check that doesn't bounce.
Good deal. Good deal. Bud?
To thank all the citizens at home and those who came here tonight to pay attention to the city government. I wish everyone in the city would. And I'd like to thank the Parks and Recs Committee for Advisory Board for their fine work on the Two Tree Park. They did an excellent job. And Randy, Tanya, and their staff on the proposed budget proposal, I think did an excellent job there. Really did good. I'd like to congratulate Michael Bryant on his promotion to chief and congratulate Robert Holloway on his retirement.
Okay, thank you. Jana?
Ditto what Bud said.
Okay. Gary?
Just going to comment just briefly on the budget, although it's similar to what Randy said. But we live in a city that has increasing property values, and that's good. It does raise your taxes a little bit, but that's much better than if we live where property was really deteriorating. We have a very safe city. The police and fire, the EMS do a great job keeping it safe. Public Works keeps this place clean, keeps the street open. Library, we have great schools. The library and Parks and Recs have great programs for everybody from little bitty all the way up through senior citizens. And it's just a great place to live. I think the budget is really good, and it is going to increase taxes just a little. But then if you think about where we are and the quality of life we have and what we have here, I think you'll probably agree with me that's worth that little bit extra that occurs every. And other thing, kind of a side note, there's several Poquoson students right now that are out in Colorado Springs at the Junior Olympics in shooting events and rifle and air rifle and .22. So just wanted to comment on that, and that's all.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, someone with a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All right.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Kemp?
Aye.
Councilman Southall?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Freeman?
Aye.
Councilwoman Fox? Councilwoman Andrews?
Aye.
Councilman Five?
Aye.
Mayor Hessel?
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, the motion carried by a vote of 7-0.
All right, we are adjourned.